Okay. At this point, when you go to do the sleeve, you need your piece of paper and your Sharpie because there are some things that you need to write down. There's math involved, so you're probably going to want a calculator to make your life easier as well. I'm going to use a marker because my Sharpie is not as fine point, and I've turned the sheet so hopefully you should be able to see this. You're going to need 2 measurements from yourself and a couple of measurements from your t-shirt. Your first measurement is going to be your sleeve length. And this is the distance from your shoulder down the curve, so not with your arms straight out, but when your arms are hanging next to you, shoulder to wrist. You're also going to need your wrist circumference. I happen to know that my sleeve length is 19 inches and my wrist circumference is 6 inches. Then from your shirt, you're going to need the armhole depth and half of the armhole circumference. And for you visual people, I will draw it out for you. Excuse my poor artistic capabilities. This is the shoulder of your shirt. That is the arm side or arm sleeve connection point, and that's the side of your shirt. This dotted distance is your armhole depth, which makes this curve your armhole circumference cut in half. So you just measure it while it's lying flat. Okay, so those are the measurements that we need. And the easiest way to do this is actually using one of your templates. Specifically, either your back or your front layer. And the reason is because you've already taken a 3-dimensional piece of clothing or a piece of clothing that has 3-dimensional capabilities and made a pattern out of it, so you may as well use that information. Plus, this is the pattern that you're going to be using to cut fabric out. So again, you want to minimize any room for error in your measurements by using the specific pattern template that you'll be cutting fabric with to do all these measurements. So I need to get my ruler, and we're going to measure the armhole depth. This is a really big ruler, so you may want to use a smaller one. So I'm going to stick the point in that corner. I'm going to go up to that shoulder, and that is 8 inches. I know it's slightly less than 8, but we're ballparking here. 8 inches. Now obviously the ruler can't curve, so this is where that measuring tape you needed is going to come in handy. And I personally prefer to stand my measuring tape up on the end like this so it curves easier, but to each their own. And I basically anchor it as I go. Okay. 9.5 is the half of the arm's circumference. So 8 inches, 9.5 inches. Okay, now these are your measurements. So you're going to put your template away, and you need your ruler, a calculator, and your tracing paper or butcher paper, or if you're like me and using the painter's tarp, the painter's tarp. Okay. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to use these measurements. I'll leave them facing you so that you can see, to help you create your sleeve template. Using your ruler, you're going to make a line, a vertical line, that is slightly longer than your sleeve length. So my sleeve length is 19 inches. This whole ruler happens to be 24, so I'm just going to go the full 24 inches or close to it. Okay, now somewhere up towards the top, you're gonna make a point, and you're going to call this point A. Now this is where math is involved. Because the shoulder is a rounded area, you need to account for that rounded dimensionality by what's called the cap of the sleeve. So if you look at this shirt, and I try to lay it flat, this is that shoulder seam, notice how it bubbles. And that bubbling is because it's accounting for, I'm balling my fist in here, it's accounting for that curve of the shoulder when you put it on. And so that's the cap. And to do this, to make it fitted, you need to reduce the cap by 33%. That's generally the rule of thumb. If you're making a box t-shirt, you probably don't need to reduce it, or you might reduce it by less than 33%. But we're gonna go with 33%. And I'm gonna get my handy dandy calculator out. The cap reduction is going to be done by dividing the armhole depth into thirds, because 33% is roughly a third. So 8 divided by 3 is 2.67, so 2 of an inch. So you're going to reduce the 8 inches by 2 2/3. So if we do that, we have 5 1/3. I'm just going to circle that so I know that's my cap reduction. So now taking that cap reduction, I'm going to use my ruler, and we're going to ballpark it. 2 1/3, 2 1/4, pretty close. Or sorry, 5 1/3, 5 1/4, pretty close. So start with that point A, I'm going to mark a point where it is 5 1/3 of the distance below that point A. So again, kind of ballparking it here. And I'm going to label that B. And the other point I'm going to mark on this line is my sleeve length. So using A, I'm going to mark 19. Inches, perfect. And I'm going to mark that C. Okay. Now you're going to square up a line perpendicular at point B. So this is why using one of these lovely gridded rulers is really helpful, because I can just use the lines on this ruler, lay it right on top of the line that I drew, so I can get a perfect 90-degree angle going through point B, and I'm going to take it out to the side. All right. Sorry, I know it's folding. Here, I'll put a couple weights down so hopefully that there's no glare. Okay. Now remember that armhole circumference that we had talked about? That width, length, circumference, 9.5 inches, you're going to find where 9.5 inches would fall on this line from point A. So 9.5 inches is about here. Okay. Now I'm going to leave the ruler there, because what we need to do to this 9.5 is find the quarter points. So 9.5 divided by 2 is 4 3/4. So I'm going to go 4 3/4, and I'm going to make a mark. That means the quarter mark is going to be 2 inches and 3/8 of an inch. So here's 2 inches, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to mark that there. And I'm not going to exercise my brain like that. I'm just going to move it right up using this as a guide and go 2, 1, 2, 3. So now I've got that 9.5 quartered, half, and then the quarters. Well, we'll label this one D. So we'll label the middle E, F, G. Okay. So from F, I'm going to measure 1/2 inch up above that line and drop a mark. And of course, it's sitting right on F. And I'm going to draw a line marking that half. And at point G, I'm going to drop it 1/2 inch below that point, like that. Now you're going to use your French curve and create the cap. What you're going to do is go from A to F, F through E, flip it over to get the curve, E to the bottom of G, and G to D. Now, if you can imagine with me, that is the curve of your sleeve. Remember, I had you figure out your wrist circumference. C is your sleeve length. Your wrist circumference, my wrist circumference is 6, so 1/2 of 6 is 3, so imagining this is on the fold, I'm going to mark out 3 inches. And using this grid line, I'm going to create a line perpendicular to it at my wrist and take it out to 3. And then I'm going to connect point D, we'll call that H, to H. Now guess what? If I wanted, I could, in theory, create a long sleeve boyfriend t-shirt because I have the full sleeve length. But we are replicating the boyfriend t-shirt as it is. Granted, I've already altered it. So I just need to know what this part, so this is the sleeve, right? Here's the sleeve. I want to know how deep that goes. That's the underarm. I'm going to, from what I'm looking at, it looks like 1.5 inches, but let's just, yep, that's 1.5 inches. Here, I'll go from the other side so you can see. 1.5 inches. 1/2 inch for the seam allowance, so it's 2 inches. So that means from this line, this is where the shoulder would, or the sleeve would end, I'm going to mark 2 inches below. And draw my line. Now I know this is really confusing because there are so many pieces and lines running around everywhere, so we're just going to trace what we need. And this is where we're going to add in our seam allowance, because again, what we just measured out is the fitted piece. It does not account for any seams. So we're going to draw our fold line and our hem line. The hem, 1/2 inch hem has already been added. This is the underarm, so we're going to take it out just a little bit longer. Let's put a pattern weight here. And we're going to use the grids of this line to make it easier and trace all the way up. We should probably extend that. And at this point, I am going off that first layer. That's okay. And then on this curve, we're going to be needing to extend it by 1/4 inch. So make sure that's lined up. Go up 1/4 inch. Mark 1/4 inch locations to break it up. Make it easier to mark. There. Now I'm going to label it. Here's my fold. Cut 2 on fold. There are 2 sleeves on the shirt. There is a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Stretches sideways. Grain is up and down. And your sleeve is done.